Okay, so we are here today with Mods for Quads on another interview. And today we're here with Jim Harris, who is also from Colorado and is a friend of Adam's. And thank you, Jim, for joining us. And we're going to ask you some questions about your injury and your recovery and just your life after your accident. So, my first question for you is please indulge us and tell us what happened to you with your back and how old you were.
Mm-hmm. Um, my spine injury was about 6.5 years ago. I broke my back on a trip in Patagonia. It was at the beginning of a ski expedition, and we had these snow kites that kind of act like a sail for a sailboat to pull us across flat, frozen glacier. And I was picked up and slammed down. I shattered 9 vertebrae, and most of my nerve injury was at T7. So I spent about a week in a little hospital in Chile and eventually was evacuated back to the United States, where I reached definitive care, and T5 through T10 were fused together. Yeah, so that was my initial accident.
Holy cow. What was going through your head at the time it happened? Did you know what was going on or did you even remember any of it?
Yeah, I remember like regaining consciousness and realizing that I was paralyzed, and I remember that like realizing I was concussed and realizing I was paralyzed, and I remember trying to crack some jokes about it that day in the process of trying to get evacuated back to the front country. Um, no, I think I was fairly stoic about it, I guess, from the very outset. Like seemed like I didn't come particularly close to dying, but it seemed at the time, it seemed like I was trying to keep myself composed and to deal with this kind of crazy crisis, that it felt like my active participation was necessary to get help.
Yeah. Um, well, I'm so sorry that happened. It sounds like a pretty intense way to break your back. I'm surprised you're even still alive, actually.
Right? Yeah. I mean, I think, yeah.
Um, so what do you feel like the biggest setbacks have been in your recovery? Like things that were unexpected or, that were abnormal?
Um, well, with my injury, it was unique in that I was such a long and difficult journey to definitive care. Um, and I was in this unique situation of being in this little South American hospital and having purchased some expedition insurance for our group that allowed me to be evacuated to the hospital of my choice. But then there was no way to comparison shop for surgeons or surgical centers. There's no way to compare prices or to see how many spine fusions one doctor has done, or what the recovery rate of patients from one procedure versus another. Like there's no tools in the American medical system to compare, to have any kind of informed choice. It's just entirely based on like word of mouth and reputation. People being like, "Oh, I hear Mayo Clinic's really good." And like, yeah, they have a good reputation, but like, there's no. But like, will that cost more? Will that cost less? Is there a chance of a better outcome by opting for a procedure that's more expensive, or with someone who's more experienced? But there's just none of that information is available. And so that was I think it's probably somewhat unusual for a patient to be in my situation, where most people who are hurt in North America get, they're in the ambulance and they're gonna go have a spine fusion, most likely with whoever, whatever the nearest regional hospital is. Like most people aren't choosing their surgeons or choosing their procedures. But in my case, where I potentially had the opportunity to do that, there's just zero information available as a consumer of healthcare to make an informed choice about any of those things.
Yeah, it's so unfortunate. I just got some eardrops because I was going
Mm-hmm.
Costa Rica and I knew I was going to go surfing and I got your infection disease. So I did another telehealth, like new, get up and talk to your doctor for nurse practitioner for 5 minutes. I got a $300 bill for that. And then the antibiotics that were all of like not even an ounce were like $300 too.
Yeah, our system's a little bit broken. Yeah,
Anyway,
I
well,
did.
is there a reason
Go ahead.
why you waited a year to have it fused or were you trying to?
Oh, I didn't wait a year. I waited. It just took like 8 or 9 days to get back to the United States.
Oh, I don't know why I thought you said on your 30th.
No, no. So it was, so that did feel like a step back because I think it was, um, just so many outcomes of nerve injuries, of brain and spine trauma, are correlated to how quickly the tissue gets decompressed.
Yeah. Did they give you a
Um, and
prognosis?
so, sorry.
Sorry, did they give you a prognosis like we don't expect you to heal past this or that you
No,
might have the
never. I never got a very informed prognosis. Um, no, like the doctor, there was like a surgeon at this hospital in South America who was interested in operating on me to stabilize my spine, and I elected not to have him do the surgery. Um, in hindsight, it turns out I don't think he had very much experience with spine fusions at all, and the methodology he described that he wanted to use was something that sounded like um, is is pretty antiquated in North American medicine.
so you
Um,
made a choice there, sounds like, huh?
yeah, but I mean, at the time, it was, yeah, weighing this the outcomes tend to be so much better for people whose tissues decompress really quickly, like the people who have a brain or spine injury and get into surgery within, say 1 to 3 hours, tend to have much better outcomes than the people in the 3 to 6 hour bracket. And the more hours that tick by, the um, often it correlates with worse rehab outcomes. And so my case is unusual in that I was, like 8 days from definitive care, um, and yet have still had this pretty phenomenal recovery um, from what I would think was like Asia D, and now I'm Asia B.
That's awesome. So how long did it take you to get to that increase of skill? Was it just
Mm,
a
I
recovery?
couldn't feel or move anything pre spinal decompression, and after that surgery, um, I didn't have any sensation, but I could like I was able to like follow within a day or two after surgery, was able to move one toe just a tiny amount. And then that slowly increased over the following um, 6 weeks or so. I think by about a 5 weeks after surgery, I was able to um, lift my left like heel off the bed an inch or so when like bolsters and pillows were under my knee. I started to be able to like flex that quad muscle just a little bit. And then it took another month before my left side, I'd motor return more quickly on one side than on the other. Um, and to this day, I still have greater motor deficits on right side than on left side.
So Adam and I, in some of our interviews and just talking to him about his injury, it seems like the brain and I don't know, intuitively, you just kind of feel like you want to keep going over in your head the activities, that you've done in the past and what your body needs to do in recovery. Like, did you feel like there was a large portion of that was a mental contribution to your healing versus just natural healing, or can you speak to that at all?
I think there's a ton of kind of life skills and personality pieces that maybe I developed, some of which I developed really consciously over years of all this like expedition travel leading up to my accident, um, and some of which I think was maybe just sort of a byproduct of it or something more innate that all really aided my recovery. And like some of those things, I think that I think people who have because of their background in athletics, are good at visualizing their bodies doing something before they actually do it. That being able to picture slam dunking a basketball in your head and then actually going and doing it, like that translates really well to spine injury recovery. But it's also really kind of a strange skill to picture yourself doing something in space and to have this like kind of intensely imagined scenario that you run through in your head before doing it. But I know that's something that Adam is really familiar with from all of his years, both from mountain biking and from woodworking, and that skill set of being able to visualize like a movement again and again and again before doing it turns out to be a really key one for spine injury recovery, but it's not one that everyone has a lot of practice doing. Or another one that seems like it really correlates to recovery outcomes are the people who have opted into the kind of struggles in their life where they're good at taking a really big goal or problem and breaking it down into smaller chunks. And that's another one where it seems like people who have, like in the outdoor world, in the rock climbing and mountain climbing community, people joke about type 2 fun. So type 1 fun is like fun that's like fun while you're doing it, and then it's also fun in hindsight. And type 2 fun is something that kind of like sucks when you're doing it, but then after it's done, you want to go back and do it again. Like running a marathon is like the classic example of type 2 fun. And so it's like, all the things that we do, going to the gym or whatever, when it's miserable when you're doing it, and then afterwards you feel good and maybe you want to like go do that again. And people who gravitate to that or have an aptitude for that, or like seem like it's a lot easier to like shoulder the burden of the hundreds or thousands of hours of rehab that's going to take to make meaningful progress from a nerve injury. If you have that sort of outlook, like, oh, I know I'm not going to enjoy this while I'm doing it, but once I've done it, that's going to feel like, happy and funny and fun and meaningful, and I'm going to want to go back and do it again tomorrow.
Yeah, like a new learned skill and that your body improved in a certain way or function or
But
talent.
that's kind of a certain way of understanding the world. And
Well, I agree, and
not a,
you're explaining the definition of neuroplasticity, the brain ability to change based on mental intention and all of those visualization and chunking it down and doing it every day and hours and hours and hours and hours.
mm-hmm.
Did you, in any kind of way, become a little bit, because I'm just getting this feeling, addicted to your recovery? Like, I am doing this. Like, once you saw a little bit of, positive feedback, just continuing on.
Yeah, I think, one strange facet of my accident was that because I was in Chile, and because I didn't have access to definitive care there, I didn't really have a very meaningful prognosis for quite a while. And so sort of in that absence of information, I just decided in those first couple of days that I was going to like learn to walk again. And I don't imagine that I would have had that same conviction if, say, like a doctor had been like, hey, Jim, here's what these CT scans look like, and here's what I'm seeing, and I just don't think there's much hope. I think I probably would have trusted that authority versus like the people that some people seem to have a personality trait where they really rebel against that kind of prognosis.
Yeah.
And some of those people have really big recoveries where they're just like, F you, watch this. Like,
Yeah.
I don't believe you. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know me. But I'm not sure I think I'm maybe more differential to like authority than, or at least deferential enough to like scientific rigor or something, that I would be like, oh, well, if that's what the MRIs and CT scans say, if that's what this person who's gone to school for however 15 years of training to be in this role as a neurosurgeon, if that's what they see, then how would I know any better than that? So I think because I
Beg
didn't have
to
a
differ.
prognosis or a diagnosis, then I think that in some weird way helped me.
That's so awesome. I mean, it begs to differ whether we should even really give a prognosis when it comes to the brain, you know?
There's
And
a good friend of mine who maybe Adam has crossed paths with also. It's really her story to share. But she was in a situation where she works in a medical field and is a walking quadriplegic, but was told that she was never going to walk again. And as part of that, the surgeon opted not to do some other. She'd broken some bones, some other bones in her accident. They elected not to repair, and because they didn't think she was going to walk again. And then she has learned to walk again, and now has these other issues that have been greatly compounded because they elected not to do these surgeries at the time. And she's gone back and confronted the surgeon who made that call. And he was like, "Oh yeah, well, we didn't think you'd walk again." And she was like, "Well, you didn't know that." Like, and
yeah,
that's something, the piece of that comes up in conversation a lot with people who have been freshly injured. Where it seems, my impression is that, there's a lot of pressure on doctors in the medical establishment to give a prognosis, even when our understanding of neurology and the way that we can image human bodies just isn't precise enough to really give a very meaningful one.
more from a liability standpoint, you think, or just?
I think part of it seems like it is like the doctors are responding to this pressure that patients are putting on them, which is that we are nervous creatures and we really struggle with uncertainty. And in the midst of a huge life crisis like a spine injury or a brain injury, the patient and the loved ones just want to know, what is the future going to look like? There's just such uncertainty, and it's so uncomfortable to sit in that not knowing, that people want an answer. And so I think there's a lot of pressure on the doctors from the families. And then there's also probably pressure from a liability standpoint. And they're like, well, these people want a definitive answer. But if I give an overly optimistic definitive answer and that turns out to be wrong, then maybe that person could open themselves to some sort of lawsuit liability or something like that. So they tend to give the most, like the gravest outcome. And that's really hard. I mean, I don't think doctors are doing it maliciously. I think they're doing it to respond to these needs that we have as humans, it's really hard to not know. And it's really hard to hear a doctor say, we don't know, and we're not going to know for months. Like, you may not.
Well, and I think you can argue the point that, like your friend could have maybe had more of a recovery if she would have gotten the surgery that, would have helped. But I think also on the back end too, and maybe I'm wrong and just uneducated, but it seems like they do a lot of stabilizing over fusing surgeries too sometimes, where the bones may be able to have a chance to heal and give more mobility. So it could go either way.
Yeah.
I know I personally don't feel like we should tell people when they're going to die either. It's like, oh, well, you have 5 more days. I don't know.
Right.
I don't feel like it's
Right. It's really similar to the people like, oh yeah, you have 6 months to live, and you're like, that's a real. It's really problematic to phrase things so definitively, because we, so many of us take that as a very literal answer instead of a really speculative answer that it is.
right.
I've always thought that it might be helpful for them to phrase it in terms of what you can expect. It's like, you should, at your injury level, based on what we've seen so far since the time of your injury, you shouldn't expect more than such and such recovery, but if it did happen, it would be, a low percentage or whatever. Phrasing it in terms of expectation versus possibility, I think, is a big one.
Well, and
yeah,
statement that a lot of this recovery has to do with your own, dedication, and we don't know everything about the brain or the nervous system. You know, it's anybody,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, it's too complicated to know how a nerve is going to repair. Like electrical.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, well, back to you. That was all very fascinating. Thank you. I'm glad we went in depth on that because we haven't done that yet, and it's such good information. Um, but obviously, your life changed significantly. Previously, tell us what you did previously and what you're doing for a living now.
Um, Prior to my accident, I had a handful of freelance jobs and clients. I did a lot of like outdoor photography and filmmaking, and wrote some articles. But a lot of it was like an expedition and wilderness travel world. Been on a couple National Geographic assignments and helped make some ski films. And then following my accident, I was in the fortunate position where I really was able to. I was, in as an inpatient for about 4 months, and then an outpatient for about another 2 months, and then spent a summer in California doing physical therapy with High Fives Foundation, and just was able to dedicate another 3 months to just being in the gym all day, and really have that being my close to my only life responsibility for a while. I lived in the basement of somebody who I met at Craig Hospital. I lived in that area and generously shared his home. Um,
That's
and
awesome.
then following that, I moved to Colorado to work for a nonprofit film festival, and did that for a couple of years, and then went back to freelance work, which is like some marketing and communication stuff um, for some nonprofit groups and businesses in the conservation and out and wellness space. And then I also do some fine art. I just got offered an art residency in Zion National Park for this fall, so I think I'm gonna go
Oh
spend a
my
month in the national park. And
God. I love, love, love Zion. It's so
what a cool place, huh?
favorite places. Yeah, there's something special about it for sure. That sounds awesome. So you're kind of like back on track.
I'm back. It's a weird track to be on a little bit. I feel like my girlfriend sometimes just tells people that I do gym stuff.
Well, it sounds like it's right up our alley. I mean, we would love to put together some really fun events and have mentors on our site. And so, yeah, I'd love to
I'd
talk.
love to be involved. Yeah.
Um, what else haven't I asked you? We kind of covered quite a few of our questions. Is there anything that you would want to recommend to people out there? Obviously High Fives is an incredible organization, but that have been really key to your recovery, like maybe that's are unique or different than the mainstream.
Mm-hmm. I think an area that I'd hope to see more research and focus on in the next few years in the spinal injury recovery world is around diet. It seems like there's an awful lot of evidence to suggest that 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 some or many of the long-term effects from acute spine trauma are from the inflammation that follows the trauma itself. Like, it's not actually the spinal cord that's being severed. Often it's the swelling, that's sort of like the bruise, the contusion, the indirect trauma from the impact that causes so much the tissue damage and long-term neurological deficits. And that there's some ways that we could potentially be changing that more through diet. And I know Adam is attentive to the foods that he puts in his body for those reasons. But it's really disappointing to see, all the fried food and sugary processed food that hospitals serve, when there's potentially this window for people to have a really low inflammation diet, There were things that was something that I became really interested in the time that I was in the hospital, and I started doing things like intermittent fasting and trying to eat, very few processed carbohydrates, where there's a fair amount of research in the neurodegenerative world that people with MS or Lou Gehrig's or some of these other neurodegenerative diseases are able to really dramatically slow the progress of their nerve degeneration through diet. And it seemed like at least worth trying that some of that might apply to a traumatic spine injury. But in the meantime, I got a lot of pushback from nurses and from other patients and other patients' parents. Like, people did not like that I was like skipping 2 meals a day and trying to eat all my calories in like a few hour window, or like, people had a lot of feelings about the things that I was trying. But I just came across a scientific research paper this morning that shows that a ketogenic diet was effective for helping rats to recover from paralysis. And so I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that things like ketogenic diets or intermittent fasting, and certainly eliminating alcohol and processed foods and things like that can really make a pretty dramatic difference, especially through the early phases of recovery for someone with a spine injury.
Yeah, and that's interesting. That's really fascinating. I think that's such a great idea. It's so very true. And I'm surprised you got kickback. I mean, that's pretty much what you follow, Adam, is 1 meal a day and you get all power pack all your nutrients as much as you can in liquids. And like, he's got a whole science to it. We did
Yeah.
on that, but we probably should focus a little bit more on that. I totally agree with you. I can feel
Well,
if I
there's
have
just not
drinks one night, the next day, I feel inflammation for sure. Like,
yeah. There's it'll be interesting to see how what the next few years are of medical research uncover with our microbiome and inflammatory diseases, because it sure seems like there's some strong evidence pointing towards a great long list of kind of modern ailments all being possibly tied to diets and maybe some of the pesticides that get used in manufacturing our food.
yeah.
And that by being intentional about what we put around our bodies, we can really give our bodies the best chance for recovery, especially in those weeks and months after an acute trauma. And that doesn't seem
Cancer patients. They
what's
put
that?
they put cancer patients now on ketogenic diets. I'm wondering why they wouldn't do that for people in paralysis. That's such a good point.
I mean, there's so one of the pieces of evidence in favor of intermittent fasting and ketogenic diets is that they both cause these increases in human growth hormone, and then also NGF and nerve growth factor. And so back in the time of my accident in 2014, I was aware of some of those diets just in like the fitness industry and fitness community. But it sure seemed like they would apply to my situation in ways that people haven't really been utilizing. And my understanding is that some of the reason those diets are popular among people with neurodegenerative diseases is that it can help speed up sort of the process where our body is digesting these cells that are breaking down, and metabolizes those and replaces them with fresh, new, undamaged nerves. And so by kind of accelerating that process, people with MS, for instance, are sometimes able to slow the progress of their disease.
Well, I'm an Ayurveda practitioner, so I think it's so important to take each individual into account. Like,
Mm-hmm.
body type, what's their metabolism like? How are they in repair? What are we at risk most of? Because it's not just like, okay, everybody should follow this. It's so individualized, and I think
Really
like you and Adam and me, even being athletes and trusting our bodies so much, you get almost this innate awareness of what you kind of know you need. But I don't think that majority of the population really knows how to listen to that inner wisdom. It's just
Mm,
they get,
that's a really good point. Yeah. I,
you know, there's a difference between tipping that scale with cravings that are unhealthy versus cravings that are healthy. So I don't know. It's complicated.
it is. It is. Yeah. I guess this is a good opportunity to say that I'm not a nutritionist or a doctor, and all opinions are my own speculation here.
Well, right, but I can just tell by looking at you that you know your body and you know exactly what you need to do for it. And even by not hearing a prognosis and knowing what you needed, even from a nutrition standpoint, I mean, you're walking again. So, as far as I'm concerned, you guys are some of the biggest healers out there. You know, I mean, repairing your central nervous system and having that mental toughness to just keep persevering to walk again. I mean, tell us a little bit more about that. You know, where are you in your recovery as far as your abilities, and what are you still striving for?
Mm,
Or
yeah,
can
I'd say I guess my like the things I'm striving for are maybe like kind of like quality of life goals. I think there was maybe especially for the first 2 years after my accident, I was really focused on like fairly concrete rehab goals. Um, and one way I think about it or explain it to people is that I feel like I had this sort of sense of self-identity, kind of in a psychological capacity. I had this sense of self-identity that was really focused on my skills and accomplishments in the outdoors, and that after my accident, those very quickly just didn't feel very relevant to my sense of identity anymore. It's like, okay, well, I've done these cool things. I have this interesting resume, but like, is that really who I am, and does that inform who I am? But in the meantime, I had this injury that just handed this entire new set of like very obvious needs and goals of like, okay, well, if I have this opportunity to make some sort of a partial recovery from paralysis, then I'm going to engage that as best as I know how, and to kind of have this new sense of purpose and meaning around that lasted for about 2 years, and then I'd really kind of like kicked the can of like chronic depression down the road about that far, where it's just like, well, we'll see where I kind of was focused on these goals and these gains and this incremental progress, and at some point, as a sense of like identity of like being rehab guy, that just kind of dried up for me, and it felt like I was dealt with quite an existential crisis for a while. Um,
Yeah, I can imagine.
yeah, around purpose and meaning, um, and so I think my rehab goals now are more about like um, part of it is still me just dealing with the social insecurity that I feel and like doing activities with friends who have different abilities than I have, and um, yeah, like I don't know, like so much of the spine injury recovery is this really tricky balance, or any kind of long injury recovery is this tricky balance um, between like acceptance of the trauma and some sort of like acceptance on a very heartfelt level of like, this happened and this is okay, and what I am right now is okay, um, and really feeling that, and at the same time still having some inclination to like lean back against that those restrictions, or to like set a new goal. And I think that balance changes for me, that balance point between like, no, I'm gonna like put my nose to the grindstone, and this isn't I'm not okay with the status quo, versus being like, oh yeah, no, this is fine. I can
Yeah.
just like be happy and be content the way things are.
Yeah, I think there's a natural ebb and flow for all of us in that respect, but
Yeah,
that's
sure, sure.
right. And I mean, after interviewing as many people as we have, I have to say, I've yet to meet somebody that's been injured to your capacity that hasn't been an extremely successful athlete or, whatever you were doing beforehand. And then after, just the level of awakeness and consciousness and the small egos and the amount of compassion and I don't know, just wisdom that you all have is it's really, you
Oh,
know,
thanks. That's quite a compliment.
I'm honored to be, you know, I feel like being mentored by you guys. So anyway, thank you for being so incredibly vulnerable and telling
Of
us
course.
everything. And I would love to have you, get to know you better and have you be a mentor for us and get involved. I don't know. It sounds like your schedule is pretty packed too.
I've got all the time in the world for things like this.
Oh, that's really sweet. I think I feel like we had a really great interview. Adam, do you have anything else you want to ask or say?
Oh, just saying how much I appreciate being friends with Jim, and I always have such good conversations with him, and usually an epiphany or two along the way. Um, so really appreciate
Well,
you, Jim.
thanks so much, Adam. What was resonating with for you today? Is there anything that stood out for you, especially that comes to mind?
Oh, with the interview,
Mm-hmm.
it was, well, for me, it's interesting hearing your story, the way you were telling it. And I didn't know about your extrication really, and we all have such different starting points, you know, and
Mm-hmm.
even though we have that camaraderie and baseline understanding what each other's going through, it's remarkable how unique each of our situations are, and we have so
Mm-hmm.
much to learn about each other, even though we have so much background, Um, so for me, honestly, it was just cool hearing your perspective. You know.
Thanks, Adam.
Yeah, a lot of things you have to say could really change the outcomes for people if we could somehow get that integrated.
Mm-hmm.
But well, thank you so much. And yeah, this is awesome. I feel like it's one of our best interviews for sure.